Chapter 884. Destined Encounter. The golden-eyed demigod from the lone military nodded in agreement. Indeed. It's similar in style to certain fellows from the Intis intelligence agencies. However, just seconds after he took away the soil, the Tutansis II mummy vanished. It's unlikely that he could complete a ritual in time. The lady looked down at the crown of thorns that was embedded in her neck. Slightly slow to react, she said. Perhaps he or they had already set up the other steps of the ritual. Once he teleported back, he immediately threw the soil onto the altar, completing the final step. Of course, it's not necessarily a ritual. It might also be a sealed artifact that achieves a certain effect with the help of bodily fluids. There are too many possibilities for this. Although sealed artifacts' main effects and negative effects mostly adhere to the sequence traits of the 22 pathways, allowing researchers to barely come up with a hypothesis. Just like how everyone had different personalities, sealed artifacts were different. Perhaps due to fusing with an object, the environment when formed, the possible existence of a high-level sequence's aura, or a curse from the original owner, these resulted in all kinds of strange traits that made them not viable for testing. No one could imagine ahead of time the different permutations and list them all out. The golden-eyed demigod pulled out a chair and Saturday. This is very difficult to investigate, so we can temporarily not consider it. However, you missed out on a direction for the investigation. Do you still remember that hurricane? It swept up Tutansis II's sarcophagus, causing the ritualistic items, which is also the bodily fluids, to leak out, and it also caused the mummy to tumble out. This enabled the condition for zombifying it. In short, this established the foundation for the subsequent development, so it can be confirmed that this was done by the mysterious man or his helper. The turbidness in the lady's eyes grew faint as she slowly removed the crown of thorns. Do you mean that, with the Church of Storms in control of the Sailor pathway and the high-sequence formulas and Beyonder characteristics, there won't be many Beyonders or mystical items that can use hurricane? Thus, this is a clue that we can follow to find their trail? The golden-eyed demigod nodded. Also, I remember that not long ago, there was a case in East Borough. The Aurora Order's Mr. X was assassinated at a gathering he convened himself. Lightning storm and hurricane had been used at the scene. This garnered a lot of attention from the Church of Storms, and they have been constantly looking for clues. To have two hurricanes happen in the same area in a short period of time and not belong to official organizations, this can't be a coincidence. I believe it can be preliminarily determined that there is a connection. The group of people who killed Mr. X and stole the mummy might be one and the same. We need to join forces with the Church of Storms to investigate. The lady lowered the crown of thorns and thought. That's a good angle. Also, from their goals and motives, we can figure out certain things. People who want to use a mummy as a zombie wouldn't take such a high risk by attempting a theft. I suspect that, to those people, the Tutansis II mummy is something they attach additional importance to. Something that's key to a ritual? The golden-eyed demigod deliberated as he said. From the scene, the one who was carrying something special to attract the mummy was likely a wraith or had the corresponding mystical item. Combining the goals and motive, I have a theory. The lady's heart stirred as she blurted out. Members of the Temperance faction that escaped from the Rose School of Thought. Yes. The golden-eyed demigod nodded. Although the creation of mummies is influenced by aspects like the faith in death and sun worship, despite the Rose School of Thought occupying a ruling position in the Highlands, Valley, and other places, it hasn't forbidden such burial practices. This implies that mummies are of use to them. Perhaps it's the ritual requirement of one of the sequences. Upon saying this, he chuckled in a self-deprecating tone. There's another possibility. To show off an act. That bunch of people might not really want the mummy. It just happened to satisfy certain conditions, giving them the opportunity to steal. Hence, they did a grand act. To some sequences of particular pathways, this is key to digesting the potion. As a demigod, he was knowledgeable, so he naturally made many connections. The lady deliberated and said in a heavy voice, I suspect that it's not just one possibility but a potpourri of reasons. We shall use this as the foundation for our investigations. Backlund. Cherwood Borough. In a building near the Tussock River. The silent one Mimosi sat in front of a square table that had a tablecloth spread across it with golden nails placed on it. It said in a deep voice, Zatwin, who do you think stole the Khedive mummy? Not far behind him, a figure rapidly appeared on a piano bench. This figure wore a black clergyman's robe with a black glove on his left hand. His face was thin, and his skin color was brown. His eyes were recessed like a dried corpse. His mustache hair was black at the root and white outwards. They extended from his mouth all the way to his ear. However, it wasn't thick and was rather short. It appeared rather sparse. Zatwin's eyes were close to his skin color. Despite having the bearing of a priest, he gave off a cold and terrifying feeling. He appeared to be someone who would transform amidst silence. Thinking, he said, there are only a handful of people who yearn for a Khedive mummy and would be willing to take the risk to battle demigods. And here in Backlund, there's only Sharon. She has likely received Rionette Tinker's help. Otherwise, it's impossible for her to succeed. Mamosi picked up a golden nail covered in dense patterns. After a few seconds of silence he said, who was the one who teleported? It doesn't resemble Gehrman's sparrow. Another helper Sharon hired? Perhaps. Zatwin coughed as his pale face flushed blue. I believe we need to think of a way to pray to Mother Tree. We should be able to receive a revelation. Mamosi nodded gently and stabbed the golden nail through his bottom lip. Upon seeing this, Zatwin covered his mouth and slowly got up. He staggered down to the first floor in preparation to leave and return to his hideout. On the first floor, he saw a dark environment with shimmering candlelight. The fragrance of food wafted from different directions, filling the air. The residential buildings in the nearby area were terraces. Facing the street on the first floor were shops. The contact point of the Rose School of Thought was in a restaurant which mainly served southern continent cuisine. As he had suffered quite serious injuries in the operation, Zatwin didn't wish to maintain his state as an evil spirit. It was too great a burden on the injured him. Therefore, he had changed into a black clergyman's robe as he hobbled to the entrance. At this moment, a customer walked into the restaurant. This customer wore a black formal suit with black pants and leather shoes. He had a pair of black eyes and a thin face. He had a slightly broad forehead as he wore a monocle and a very tall top hat. As he casually glanced around, his gaze landed on Zatwin. Upon seeing the black glove Zatwin was wearing on his left hand, the ends of the customer's mouth curled slightly. He shook his head with a smile, seemingly a little disappointed. Then, he entered the restaurant, brushing past Zatwin who had stared back with a maleficent look. Zatwin didn't pay too much attention as he walked out and reached the streets. Under the illumination of the street lamps, the night's cool breeze blew at him, causing the Rose School of Thought demigod to suddenly tremble. Zatwin knew that this was a result of his spiritual perception being triggered. With his heart tightening, he immediately looked down at his hands, surprised to realize that the black glove on his left hand was gone. Gone. As a demigod, Zatwin didn't know when the sealed artifact on his hand disappeared. He quickly turned around and looked into the restaurant as the image of the man from before suddenly surfaced in his mind. Soon, he locked onto the target's aura and found that he was still inside the restaurant. The man had even called out to the waiter to bring him a menu. Zatwin originally had thoughts of using Mirror Blink to possess the man. But for some unknown reason, his hands shook involuntarily. In an indescribable manner, he believed that a dangerous and terrifying enemy hid in his surroundings. Just as this thought flashed past his mind, Zatwin subconsciously took a step to the side, walking to the end of the street as though nothing had happened. In an apartment in Sherwood Borough, Furs was reading the latest issue of Ladies' Aesthetic when she suddenly heard a key turn and the sound of the door opening. "Why are you so late today?" She looked towards the door where Zio stood. Zio ruffled her short blonde hair and said, "When I was almost home, I saw a meetup mark from MI9. It was urgent." "What happened this time?" With piqued interest, Furs lowered the magazine in her hand. "A continuation of Mr. X's assassination." Zio bent down to switch to her home slippers and said in passing. The look on Furz's face froze as her eyes darted about slightly. "Any clues?" "Not really." Back then, a hurricane at the demigod level appeared. It's not common outside the Church of Storms, and just earlier tonight, there was a small-scale hurricane attack at the dock at Pritz Harbor. A pharaoh mummy was stolen away in the chaos, Zio explained simply. MI9 suspect that the two cases were done by the same group of people, so they are pressing informants like us to work harder at gathering intel and finding clues. My Laymanos Travels still has a hurricane. Mr. Gehrman's sparrow? Why is he stealing a pharaoh mummy? Furs forced a smile. Perhaps it was done by the Church of Storms? Zio rolled her eyes at her and quickly walked into the kitchen in search of food. Early morning, 160 Backlund Street. Moments after Klein finished washing up, and before he could open the door to let Richardson in, his spiritual perception was triggered. He saw Miss Messenger's headless body walk out of the void with 4 heads in hand. One of them was biting down on a rather thick envelope. Opening its mouth, a large pile of gold coins was spat out. "I can finally repay my debt." Klein glanced at Rionette Tinker's 4 necklace heads and said in relief, "I remember still owing you 3,413 gold coins. You can take the last installment away." Meanwhile, he had the baffling feeling that the pile of gold coins looked familiar. However, he didn't think too much about it because all the gold coins looked familiar to him. Chapter 885. 2 letters. Upon hearing Klein's words, one of the 4 heads which Rionette Tinker held immediately said, "All right." It opened its mouth and immediately sucked back most of the gold coins. Where it was stored was an unknown. Taking a look at the dozens of shiny gold coins left, Klein reached out to receive the rather thick envelope. He quickly opened it and scanned its opening. Indeed, it was the detailed information regarding Spirit World plunderers. After Miss Messenger returned to the Spirit World, he put away the gold coins, drew the curtains, and sat down under the morning sun, seriously reading the neat and tidy handwriting. "Thank you once again for your help. The Tutmosis II mummy is part of the advancement ritual for me. It holds deep meaning for me. Spirit World plunderers live in the depths of the Spirit World. They're extremely rare, rich in intelligence, and very aggressive. They can capture or kill creatures and make them soul avatars. Their souls can turn into their true soul's appearance, giving them similar performance and traits. They can also disguise themselves as other Spirit World creatures. When encountering them, perhaps all the Spirit World creatures around belong to them. They might be soul avatars that mustn't be neglected. This creature can effectively influence the thought processes of their prey, causing them to enter a desensitized state. Their true soul body has potent spirituality. In clashes of such nature, they are often at a noticeable advantage. They're very difficult to find. At present, there is only one place with signs of their activity: the Spirit World's Calderon City. This is a legendary city of mysterious and unknown origins. On this front there are 3 theories about them. One is that it was once Death's residence, the entrance to the underworld. 2. It's the divine kingdom left behind by a dead ancient deity from the Second Epoch. Attracted by the Spirit World, it sank and slowly transformed into a real yet illusory city. 3. It's a real city that was devoured by the Spirit World during the Cataclysm. Regardless of the theory, it elucidates one point. This city is very dangerous. It has many special and strange aspects about it. I do not have the mysticism coordinates of Calderon City. Most high-level Spirit World creatures aren't aware either. I can provide 2 suggestions. First is to use a special secret deed ritual to pray to Red Light Ire Moria to receive the corresponding answer. I won't describe in detail what red light is. If you aren't aware, you can write to ask me again. The second is to find someone from the Abraham family. They have the legacy of the Traveler's Pathway, and they have done a deep exploration of the Spirit World. Even when writing a letter, Miss Sharon exudes an extremely restrained feeling. Indeed, the pharaoh mummy is meant for the puppet's ritual. Back then, the evil spirit in the ruin had said that it could be one of the components of the ritual. Therefore, the ritual's exact requirement is to use a high-sequence Beyonder's corpse after death, one that still maintains a level of spirituality, or to use an evil spirit that results from the resentment of death. Heh. Can I pray to Orange Light to get him to help me ask Red Light? To others, finding Calderon City is a very difficult task, but to me, it's extremely simple. I can directly give this task to Miss Magician. She has just contributed greatly to the Abraham family. I hope the first theory about Calderon City is correct. That way, once I make contact with Mr. Azek, I can see the dangerous residents of this mysterious city line up in 2 rows as they welcome me. Klein shook his head, throwing such a beautiful fantasy to the back of his mind. He scrutinized the information regarding Spirit World plunderers and confirmed that they had partial characteristics of marionettist and bizarro sorcerer. They were rather dangerous high-level Spirit World creatures. To make soul avatars have the same appearance, performance, and traits of their true souls is identical to a bizarro sorcerer's ability to give their powers to a marionette. At Zeratl's level, perhaps at Sequence 3 Scholar of Yore, perhaps he can temporarily give certain Beyonder powers to other creatures that are marionettes? Klein began tearing the letter while in thought as he flicked his wrist and engulfed the letter in scarlet-red flames, burning them into ashes that fell into the trash bin. After reining in his thoughts, while dressed in pajamas, he walked to his bedroom's door to get Richardson to come in to help him change his clothes. Under St. Samuel Cathedral. As usual, Leonard Mitchell was leaning back into his chair with his legs raised on the desk. There was nothing abnormal about his expression, but he was thinking about Amon deep down. Ever since he knew that the angel had arrived in Backland, Palaz Zoroast inside him had become abnormally silent. He wasn't as active as before to proactively speak or give suggestions. If not for the answers he received when he posed questions, Leonard would have even suspected that Old Man had secretly sneaked off to find another host to parasitize. Amidst his thoughts, his Red Gloves captain, Nighthawk's deacon, Soest, walked in. How was the interrogation? Any results? The Red Gloves in the room who were dealing with their own matters quickly cast their gaze to the door. Late last night, they had just finished a mission. They had captured 3 numinous episcopate members that they had been tracking for quite some time. Now, they were awaiting the results of the interrogation. Soest sternly surveyed the room and said, "We had contributed greatly in this, but the results aren't something good. Based on the testimony of the 3 numinous episcopate members, as well as the information the church had previously gathered, we can come to a preliminary conclusion that the numinous episcopate has fractured between reviving death or creating artificial death. The latter has already achieved some progress and benefited significantly from it. They are filled with animosity towards Lone and to us. They plan to put parts of the experiments of artificial death in Backland. Yes, their thoughts are the same as your present concerns. Even if the experiment fails, there's a chance of severely damaging the capital of capitals." Leonard instantly snapped out of his daze as he exchanged looks with Cindy and Bob, seeing the surprise and rage in each other's eyes. At this moment, Soest rapped the side of the table to stop the members from further discussion. He cleared his throat and said, "Our new mission is to head to the southern continent to find the key members of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction based on clues gleaned from the testimonies we received. We need to figure out how many remnant thorns are left in Backland before uprooting each and every one of them. We will receive help from Ma'am Daly on this mission, and the church will give her the potion as an advanced payment, helping her prepare the ritual so that she can become a gatekeeper before she heads off. In addition, the high-ranking deacon in charge of the southern continent, Her Excellency the Goddesses Aelia, and the local Nighthawks, will provide us with help, giving us the corresponding sealed artifacts and helping us with the preliminary investigations. Ladies and gentlemen, head back to rest for a day and prepare yourselves. We will set off tomorrow night." "Yes, Captain." Cindy, Bob, and company stood up and replied. Leonard stood up as well, but he didn't say a word. The first thought that flashed in his mind was, "I can use this opportunity to leave Backland to escape the threat of Amon." After returning to 7 Pinster Street, he asked with a suppressed tone after closing the door and drawing the curtains, "Old man, problem solved. I believe a normal assignment for Red Gloves won't garner the suspicion of Amon, right?" The slightly aged voice in his mind replied slowly, "No." Leonard could tell that Old Man's voice appeared much more relaxed. As his mind stirred, he considered for a moment and said, "Should I write to Klein Moretti and tell him that we will be leaving Backland for a very long period of time? After all, he was the one who warned us that Amon is here." Palaz Zoroast replied in the same tone, "Write it if you wish." Leonard exhaled, pulled out a piece of paper, and picked up a fountain pen. He deliberated for a moment and lowered his wrist to write, "I have a mission that will require me to leave Backland." Looking at this short sentence, Leonard put down his pen and folded the letter. Soon, he finished preparing the ritual to summon the messenger. He lit a candle, took a step back and said in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gammon Sparrow." The howling of wind sounded in the room as it turned intense. The candlelight burgeoned as it was tainted with paleness. A beautiful blonde, red-eyed head appeared from within. Leonard pricked his brows, and just as he was about to speak, he saw that what followed the head wasn't a complete neck, but a hand grabbing the hair. Rionette Tynker, in her dark and complicated dress, quickly walked out. The 4 heads in her hand turned in unison to look at Leonard Mitchell as they spoke one after another. "You want to send a letter? This spirit world creature looks powerful. This is a perk that Klein has for joining that secret organization?" As Leonard thought, he nodded and said, "Yes." The 4 heads held by Rionette Tynker spoke one after another. "You need to pay 1 Gold coin, 1 gold coin? Messengers from the mysterious world also collect money? Leonard was somewhat astounded but was at a loss for a reaction. All he could do was reach into his pocket and take out a gold coin. Only then did Rionette Tinker raise 2 of her blonde red-eyed heads to grab the letter and gold coin. Following that, she stepped into the void and vanished. After the candle was restored to normal, Leonard muttered with a laugh, "What a strange messenger!" Just as he said that, the slightly aged voice of Pallas Zoroast echoed in his mind. "It's best you do not speak negatively behind her back." Her? Old man actually addressed a messenger as a her? A messenger can be a her? Leonard's eyes widened immediately. Pallas coughed slightly. "Her state is very strange, not better than mine. In short, that organization that believes in the fool is more, when making contact or cooperating with Klein Moretti, it's best you be more careful." After saying that, the parasite fell silent without saying another word. Leonard actually wants to use a mission to leave Backlund so as to avoid the threat from Amon? This is an idea the grandpa came up with? That's way too cowardly, no? Klein scanned the letter he received and silently muttered. He began seriously considering the idea of using the arms deal as an excuse to quickly leave Backlund for a period of time. Chapter 886. Preparations before leaving. After some consideration, Klein, who already had such a plan, smoothly cleared up his thoughts and decided on his plan of action. Pah! He flicked the piece of paper in his right hand, looking up from the soaring scarlet flames at Rionette Tinker. He planned on taking out a lone gold coin to provide payment. However, Miss Messenger had already left. There was no one in front of him. Not collecting payment? Klein was first taken aback before he made the connection. He suspected that Rionette Tinker had proactively asked for payment after being used to collecting gold coins from non-contractees. Perhaps Miss Messenger didn't say anything. She just stared at Leonard with those 8 eyes on the 4 heads of hers while waiting for him to pay the gold coin. Yet, this fellow didn't realize it at all, trying to forcefully end the summon, only to have his neck snapped. Klein hissed in alarm as he used the gold coin he had just taken out to do the divination. He received the result that Leonard Miss Messenger was still alive and doing fine. He breathed a sigh of relief, put away the gold coin and called out, "Richardson!" The half-opened room's door opened without a sound as Richardson walked in and politely asked, "Sir, how may I be of service?" "Please bring the butler here." As Klein instructed, he sighed inwardly. He had really been spoiled by the luxurious life. Even when getting someone at home, he wouldn't take even half a step. He had to do it through his valet. "Well, this is an acting requirement," he said silently to himself. Minutes later, the white-gloved Walter came to the 3rd floor and let his arms hang to his side. He stood in a standard posture to the side of Dwayne Dantes, awaiting his employer's instructions. Klein had already considered his words, so he unhurriedly said, "Go to Member of Parliament Mock's place to inform him that I've prepared the first installment. Also, prepare a carriage. I will be heading to the Bursary Foundation in the morning, and will return in the afternoon. If Member of Parliament Mock doesn't have time for me in the afternoon, head over to Dr. Aaron's place, saying that I'll pay a visit in the afternoon." Klein had already taken out £10,000 from above the grey fog, and had stored it in a tiny leather briefcase. He was waiting for the opportune time to complete the preparation work of the arms deal transaction. And to air the cache of the grey fog smell, he had deliberately teleported to the sea, feeding creeping hunger in passing. He was afraid that Amon, who also knew of the grey fog's existence, would detect the special smell while being in the same city, thus seeking out the location of the treasure he was yearning for. "All right, sir." Walter didn't ask his employer how he had gathered the first installment. If memory served him right, Dwayne Dantes hadn't been to the bank recently. Of course, this wasn't something to be bothered with. Often, foreigners, especially tycoons from Desi or Mid-Sea Shire, would prepare briefcases filled with large sums of money ahead of time. 22 Phelps Street, Lone Charity Bursary Foundation Headquarters. Klein walked through the main door and went straight to the 2nd floor where he found the reception room for directors. As an honorary director who occasionally participated in certain work, he didn't have an office here, but he could use the reception room. He clenched his right hand into a fist and held it to his mouth, deliberately coughing before stepping into the reception room. In there, he sat on the sofa. After a short wait, he stood up again and said to Richardson, who was waiting beside him, "I'll first head to the washroom." After buttoning his coat, Klein stepped out of the room and happened to meet Justice Audrey walking out of her own office. This noble lady was wearing a rather simple dress today. It was white adorned with dark green. Her sleeves and collars had frills, and at her chest were layers of intercrossed lace that formed a bow tie-like flower. She didn't even wear any jewelry. She had a girdle which he couldn't tell, but near her left arm. Her clothes clung to her skin when the wind blew, allowing a slight protrusion to appear. "Good morning, Miss Audrey." Klein wore a look of pleasant surprise as though it was a chance encounter. Audrey glanced at the good-looking Dwayne Dantes with grey sideburns and replied with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Dantes." She had wanted to cheerfully say, "Long time no see," to snide at him for not being to the Bursary Foundation ever since the opening ceremony. But considering how their relationship was that of acquaintances, she held back from saying such words. Klein rubbed his temples and shook his head with a wry smile. "I'm very sorry that I'm only coming today. I've been very busy recently. I can foresee myself being even busier in time to come. I might make a trip to the southern continent to handle certain matters." The reason why he specially came was that he wanted to inform Miss Justice that he was leaving Backlund for some time. It was to express his sincerity, hoping that this noble lady could help him watch the Bursary Foundation and allow it to be operated smoothly. To Klein, he wished from the bottom of his heart that the Bursary Foundation could help more of the poor that required assistance. Southern continent? Audrey interpreted the sincerity in Dwayne Dantes's words as she asked in surprise. Klein laughed and replied, "For business." At that instant, the first thought that came to Audrey's mind was, which Sequence 5 is about to lose his life? Upon sensing Miss Justice making some unpleasant assumptions, Klein added, "It's a partnership with the military for the sale of some necessities." What's the meaning behind this? Dwayne Dantes's identity is used to probe intel from the military. Audrey was somewhat enlightened as she raised her right hand and gestured 4 times in a clockwise fashion. She said with a bright smile, "May the goddess bless you so that everything goes smoothly." After habitually saying that, she sensed that there was something discordant about that. She had wished that the goddess would bless a blessed of Mr. Fool. This is probably closer to a curse, right? Will Mr. Gehrman's sparrow be angry? No, he's actually a kind-hearted person deep down. And I did it without any malicious intent. The one who returns from the southern continent is probably another blessed who's playing Dwayne Dantes, right? Will it be a demigod? Audrey didn't notice it as her thoughts wandered. Klein gave an exasperated smile as he equally drew the crimson moon on his chest in a familiar manner. "May the goddess bless us all. And that she doesn't smite us with divine punishment," he added silently. Following that, he spoke as though it was a casual chat. "Have you been going to the schools to do some promotions lately?" "Yes." When this was mentioned, Audrey's expression seemed to radiate. She was proud and happy that she had finally done something substantial. Just as she nodded with some strength, her green eyes revealed a look of sadness. "After visiting a few public primary schools, I found many of the children there very pitiful. To save money, they bring their own rye bread for lunch, matching it with a cup of water." Upon saying that, she looked at Dwayne Dantes and said, somewhat embarrassed, "I know that they're temporarily not bringing me along to the night schools and Sunday schools to prevent me from seeing something worse. But I can imagine things just like those workers who can only live for a few years once they start working at the factories." This was something that the World Gehrman Sparrow had once told her. It was the first time she knew of the real situation of the lower class of Backlund, but having not seen them with her own eyes, all she could do was rely on her imagination. Klein sighed and said, "Perhaps it's worse than you can imagine. There's no need to worry. Once you showcase your ability and win their trust, you will become one of them." "Okay." Audrey nodded, as though in thought about how she could showcase herself better. Klein didn't continue on the conversation. After all, this was only their 3rd meeting. They had only exchanged a few words previously, so having too long a conversation easily garnered suspicion. He pointed at the washroom and apologized before opening up his gate to walk over. Audrey looked at Dwayne Dantes's back and fell silent as she muttered, "What will it be like if it's worse?" After receiving a reply from Mocht, inviting him to the East Bala Military Veterans Mess in the evening, Klein followed his plan. Hence, he visited Dr. Aaron at 4 in the afternoon. "Mr. Dantes, your butler didn't inform me of the reason for your visit." As his wife was about a month from being due, Dr. Aaron had declined most of his work, and most of the time he had stayed at home. Towards the sudden visit of Dwayne Dantes, who he wasn't too familiar with, he was rather perplexed. Furthermore, with him not being good at interpersonal relationships, he posed the question after exchanging some pleasantries. Klein smiled. This is the thing. I might be heading to the southern continent soon. As you know, the weather there is humid and hot. There are all kinds of insects and diseases there. I wish to prepare some medicine ahead of time to prevent any accidents from happening. I wonder if you have any suggestions. I'm really sorry, but you are the only excellent doctor I know of. Dr. Aaron accepted his explanation and began seriously thinking before giving him the names of some medicine. Towards the end, Klein, who had written a note filled with words, used the excuse of a stomachache to use the washroom on the first floor. The washroom's mirror suddenly darkened as though it was covered by a thick shadow. And in the middle of the shadow, a black pram slowly steered near. In it was a blurry child wrapped in silver silk. What is it this time? Will Septon questioned using his bright voice. Klein coughed dryly and forced a smile. You should have heard that I'll be heading to the southern continent. I don't wish to miss your birth, so I would like to know when you plan to have your birthday. Will Septon sucked at his thumb and said, I don't know. Even an angel can't control when he will be born? Klein asked in surprise. Will Septon replied hesitantly, You don't understand. I've already identified 3 dates. They have unique meaning when it comes to fate, but I haven't decided. I still find it blurry. Perhaps only when the time comes will I suddenly understand what I should do. Is this decidophobia? It also gives the strong vibes of a charlatan. Klein crossed his hands and indiscernibly rubbed them. Then how would I be able to receive notice in time so that I can return in time to complete the transaction with you? Oh, that paper crane can no longer be used. Chapter 887. Familiar figure. Upon hearing Klein's question, the infant wrapped in silver silk raised his fleshy arms and threw them up. I can't do anything about it either. I'm still in my mother's womb. Although you can no longer write on that paper crane, it can still help me locate you. If there's anything, I will inform you. Klein had already expected such an answer from Will Septon. He maintained his smile and explained, That paper crane is already damaged. I think it will have problems locating my position. Following that, he gave his suggestion, Perhaps we can do this. You can summon my messenger when you're born to write to me. He wasn't too worried that Will Septon's birth would result in anything abnormal, causing the snake of fate to have to change locations while in a baby's body. That would prevent him from contacting him again. Inside the black pram, Will Septon gaped his mouth before closing it again, momentarily not giving an answer. After a few seconds, the infant's mouth curled and said, Do you think that's realistic? Not only are you getting a newborn to write a letter to you, he still needs to hold a ritual and summon a messenger? Klein chuckled and said, But you're a snake of fate. The laws of nature still need to be respected. Will Septon threw down his arms and smacked the cushion beside him. This infant thought for a moment and said, Let's do this. Get someone to watch this area. Once they realize an infant is born, they can immediately inform you. Klein's eyes dotted about for a while before saying, That works. On this matter, he had many people he could get help from. He could hire a gangster through Sharon and inform him via his messenger, or he could get the usually free Emlyn White to do it. He could also hire bounty hunter, Miss Zio, letting Miss Magician be responsible for informing the World Gairman Sparrow of the developments. He could also get a Rhodes to take note of the surroundings and report to him through a one-way communication method. However, that fellow, Emlyn's nose is very sharp. I wonder if he will smell the placenta blood and be able to identify what it truly is. If that's the case, it might result in him suffering the impact of seeing a mythical creature. His intelligence will drop and he will turn mentally unsound to the point of his body mutating. Klein hurriedly asked before Will Septon's pram retreated into the shadows. I have a teacher who I haven't been in contact for a while. Can you help me read his current fate? His name is Isaac Eggers. As Mr. Isaac hadn't replied yet, Klein couldn't help but feel worried. Back when he used the copper whistle to do a divination above the gray fog, all he saw was a silent and deep darkness. He heard a dragged-out and distant breathing, making it impossible for him to interpret what the dream meant. Will Septon sucked at his thumb and said, He's in a state of metamorphosis. It might be good, but it might also be bad. That's all that can be seen because that teacher of yours has something special on him. Something special? Something directly derived from death's godhood? Metamorphosis? This is referring to Mr. Azek's recovery of more memories. So he's in a slumber to recover his corresponding strength? Klein thought as he bowed. Thank you for your answer. Willow Septon turned his head and looked to the side. Klein thought and gave a warning. Based on what I know, Blasphemer Amon is here in Backlund. Of course, it's most likely an avatar. Willow Septon was taken aback for a moment before chuckling. It's a bane for you, but a boon for me. Amon and Ouroboros are absolute enemies. No, a more accurate description is that he hates the true creator. Amon is often thinking of means to pull him down from his throne as a god, while Ouroboros is loyal to that evil god. After saying that, the black pram retreated into the shadows as everything was restored to normal. Amon hates the true creator? I'm increasingly convinced that the true creator was one of the participants in the sharing of the ancient sun god. He is the black infant in the middle of the storm angel, white angel, and wisdom angel. Klein breathed a sigh of relief. He took 2 steps forward, turned on the tap, and washed his hands. In the evening at the East Balam Military Veterans Mess, Klein didn't immediately meet the long-faced Colonel Calvin. After he placed the briefcase with £10,000 into a heavy safe deposit box, he followed Mock to have a buffet meal at this high-end club. The dishes here mainly served southern continent cuisine. There was cream bread made from tapioca flour, ice cream dripped in the berry juice of a lilac tree, assorted seafood broth with coconut milk and palm butter, cow innards that was cooked with pepper, tomatoes and onions, Hagenti seared roasted meat, broth made from Paws Valley's delights, as well as steak and roasted squid. Compared to other places, the ingredients used here were rather high-end. The flavors were also in authentic southern continent styles, leaving Klein rather satisfied. If not for his need to maintain his image, he felt that eating a mouthful of seared roasted meat and having a mouthful of ice cream would be an excellent feeling. Indeed, I prefer food that has stronger flavors. The thing that satisfied me the most today was that aperitif. If Member of Parliament Mocked hadn't mentioned it in passing, I would have thought that it was a lightly flavored fruit juice. The pale gold liquid with 2 lemons soaked in it and a few pieces of ice makes it sweet but a little sour. There's no alcoholic taste to it, and it's refreshing. It instantly just draws away the heat from the body. Klein placed his napkin on the plate as he recounted the feelings he just had. At this moment, Mocked returned from the washroom. He smiled as he bent down and whispered into Dwayne Dantes's ear. Same room as before. All right. Klein got up, went to the room with the safe deposit box, and took out the small leather briefcase with £10,000 before heading over to the activity room where he had previously met Colonel Calvin twice. Calvin, with his long face, was already waiting inside. When he caught sight of the briefcase in Dwayne Dantes's hand, he got up with a smile. You really are a gentleman of action. I like such attitudes when handling matters. As he spoke, he extended his right hand and shook Dwayne Dantes's hand. Klein then handed the briefcase to him and said with a humble smile, as a merchant, if one isn't decisive and fast when facing an opportunity to make money, that means that they aren't suitable for this occupation. Calvin sat back down and opened the briefcase in front of Dwayne Dantes and mocked. He roughly counted the neat stacks of cash. He quickly completed the confirmation check, closed the briefcase, and looked up at Dwayne Dantes. What other thoughts do you have towards the exact details of the transaction? Klein deliberately wore a look as though he was organizing his words. After a few seconds he said, I'm planning on heading to the southern continent soon, to West Balam. Seeing Calvin and Mocked show signs of surprise, he added, I have some matters that aren't convenient to do while bringing plenty of firearms. And to make the transaction go smoothly, some advanced preparations are required. Heh, I have to put enough importance on this matter. It's a business worth tens of thousands of pounds. I'm thinking of first heading to West Balam to contact clients who have such needs, and to clear out any obvious obstacles. At an agreed-upon time, I'll contact you via telegraph and head to East Balam's border to retrieve the goods. Calvin pondered for a moment and said, You can send me a telegram after June 20th. I'll give you the details later. In short, after I receive the telegram, I'll inform the officer there and get them to pass the countersign and password to the designated personnel for them to head to the warehouse. Will you need any auxiliary personnel for protection during this time? When do you plan on leaving? I only wish to find a place to hide in West Balam where there's no Rose school of thought. The rest can be left to Danitz. When do I leave? I obviously wish to leave today and arrive there today, but that will incur suspicion. Klein considered for 2 seconds and said, there's no need for any security for the time being. In certain places in the southern continent, having such auxiliary personnel is the main cause for causing conflict. Don't worry, I have plenty of friends in West Balam. Without bringing anything of value, my safety can be guaranteed. As for when I'm leaving, my answer is as soon as possible. Calvin thought for nearly a minute before slowly nodding. I'll send someone to receive you after dinner tomorrow. The military will have an airship that needs to send goods and personnel to Desi Bay. And it's just a short distance to the southern continent via ship from there. If everything goes smoothly, it will just take 2 to 3 days. Even if there's a storm on the way, requiring a detour of the sea route, it will still take a maximum of a week. Thank you. Klein sincerely stood up and bowed. From his point of view, leaving Backlund with the military was safe enough. He wouldn't be made a target of suspicion. After discussing some details, Klein got up and bade farewell and returned to the foyer in preparation to leave. In the foyer, beside the dining table, there were nearly 10 military-clad or casually dressed men holding a cup of wine gathered. They were chatting and laughing about the recent rumors. When Klein swept his gaze over, he suddenly found a figure somewhat familiar. The man was more than 1.85 meters tall but less than 1.9 meters. He had rather long arms, and his feet were faced outwards to a certain degree. His shoulders were abnormally broad, causing his black suit to appear rather tight. Klein's mind raced as his nerves tensed up. He had already recalled the source of the familiarity. It was the demigod that met crazy Captain Connors that night. He was the demigod suspected to be working for a particular faction of the royal family, one who was supervising the human trafficking. Although this high-sequence beyonder was previously wearing a black hood that interfered with divination, preventing his appearance from being exposed, Klein remembered the traits of his body. That was what a faceless was good at. Chapter 888. A shocking glance for a second, Klein's act of casually sweeping his gaze paused on that familiar person's figure. He immediately sensed the abnormality in his reaction since a demigod's spiritual perception wouldn't fail to notice it. His back muscles tensed up as his mind raced, producing figurative sparks. He didn't immediately move his gaze away as he continued looking at the demigod suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway. He smiled at Mocked and said, "This place really isn't just for veteran officers." This sounded like a result of careful observation, but it was nothing but meaningless chatter. Mocked chuckled. Any club will exceed its original restrictions when it further develops itself. His answer didn't seem to offer anything, but on careful consideration, it did seem to imply something or perhaps something that was the complete opposite. At this moment, the broad-shouldered and long-armed gentleman in a black suit had also naturally turned his head. He looked at the two men, and he noticed that the tycoon who had donated £15,000 was looking at him and his companions while engaging Member of Parliament Mocked with a whisper. This made him feel that his look of surprise was more of a natural reaction towards learning of his occupation. Then, he retracted his gaze and continued his topic of conversation. And at this moment, Klein's back was covered in a layer of cold sweat, and his legs were going limp. Although he had, in a way, faced the demigod before and had even fought with him, to have such a close encounter in such a small place, with danger happening in a split second, this was a first. And more importantly, he was far from prepared to face a demigod. Not only did he lack a marionette, all he had on him was Death Knell, Azek's copper whistle, and the adventurer's harmonica. The sea god's scepter was impossible to bring on his person. Furthermore, the usage of it had strict environmental limitations. Otherwise, it would result in massive damage. If he kept Grozel's travels on him for too long, he might be pulled into the book world. When that happens, it would become troublesome trying to exit it. Creeping hunger was still lacking a seal, so it needed to feed every day. Unless necessary, it was impossible to take it out ahead of time. The Fate Siphon charm was made from a worm of time, so it was an unknown if it would attract him on. Unless he could use it very quickly, Klein obviously lacked the courage to bring it on him. If the demigod who was suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway had discovered something wrong with him, there was only one optimal solution he could think of. It was to blow the harmonica and summon Miss Messenger to get her to help him escape Backlund via the spirit world. He had never thought of letting Rionette Tynker engage in a direct battle while he held Death Knell from the side to find an opportunity to fire. This was Backlund, the home ground of the official Beyonders. With Miss Messenger's unique appearance, that man could easily pin a crime on her, and what awaited Klein would be a joint attack on him. There was bound to be increasing numbers of demigods and powerful sealed artifacts. How harrowing! Klein moved his gaze away in a manner that adhered to logic. Using the clown's ability to control his legs, he walked to the door in a completely normal manner. He didn't ask mocked who those people were, to appear uninterested as a way to prove that it was all just a casual glance. However, that person turning to look at him had exposed his appearance to Klein. He had thick but unmessy black brows with a short and hard crew cut of the same color. He had dark blue eyes and a high nose bridge with a bushy mustache spreading out from his mouth. He had a long face with accentuated outlines as well as callous curves. He had strong masculine vibes and was probably in his 30s or 40s. It was difficult to determine. Just on his appearance alone, Klein felt that he looked more like an Arbiter Pathway's demigod rather than one of the Black Emperor Pathway. Of course, this demigod's bearing was closer to that of a warrior's, but he was too short. Having had a clear look at him, Klein didn't need to inquire further. He could directly get a Rhodes to answer him. Even if he was still wary of the magic mirror, he could always commission Miss Zio, Miss Sharon, and company to do a simple background check. He believed that no matter how well hidden this demigod was, it was unlikely for him to have a low-ranking position. It would be easy to figure out who he was. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Klein left the East Bala military veterans' mess in a normal manner. When he boarded the carriage, he leaned on the wall, closed his eyes, and kept silent for a few seconds. Inwardly, he let out a long sigh. The disconnected trail of clues leading to the truth of the Great Smog of Backlund has finally been connected again. He didn't open his eyes or say a word, as though he was recounting the business problems he had previously discussed. But in fact, it was to quell his emotions that had been left in an upheaval. During this process, Klein realized that Richardson had tried to speak a few times, only to shut his mouth again, doing so as though he was stumped. Ultimately, he didn't say a word, focused on preparing marquee black tea for his employer. Due to his previous encounter, Klein momentarily didn't have the capacity to be bothered about him and had pretended to not notice it. Amidst the silent atmosphere and grinding wheels, they returned to 160 Backlund Street. When he reached the 3rd floor, Klein was just about to head for the bathtub that had been prepared by the lady's maid when Richardson, who was holding his hat and cane, took 2 steps forward and respectfully said, "Sir, are you heading to the southern continent soon?" "Yes," Klein replied frankly. He had even prepared £500 in cash to hand to housekeeper Tanaja for daily expenses needed for the Dwayne Dante's residence during his time in the southern continent. Meanwhile, he had a deeper understanding of the importance of having a butler and valet in high society. There were many things that a master couldn't keep from them. Therefore, any conflict in faith and political inclinations necessitated a change. Richardson hesitated and said, "Sir, I was born in the southern continent and am fluent in Deutonese. I'm also very familiar with the various local traditions. I should be of help to you." Deutonese was a common language of the ancient Balam Empire. In present-day East and West Balam, the citizens still used this language. Only people of the middle and upper class knew foreign languages like ancient Faesak, Loanese, and Intis. Klein felt lucky with regards to this because ancient Balam was once a unified empire with a true god existing in it. Therefore, although the different states had different accents, they all used Deutonese. The written language was likewise the same. This saved him plenty of trouble. If I were to encounter dozens or more than 100 dialects and languages, that would be a headache. However, Deutonese and ancient Faesak doesn't belong to the same system. I'm unable to easily grasp the various branches by learning the latter. Finding an interpreter is necessary. Oh, Anderson seems to be fluent in Deutonese. He never seemed to mention having any problems with communication in West Balam. Klein finished listening to Richardson when he suddenly realized what was stumping him. As a valet, he needed to follow whenever his employer headed out. There was no need for a butler to do so. This also meant that a valet was like a secretary for the master's daily life. In certain cases, they would also play a role as a business secretary. Clearly, Richardson enjoyed his life in Backlund and everything it had to offer. He didn't wish to return to the southern continent to see scenery or matters that would make him recall his past. Therefore, when he got into the carriage, he had tried to mention his traits but was unable to voice it out. He wished that Dwayne Dantes could find a better candidate. Klein thought for a moment before saying, I can tell that you don't like the southern continent. Why are you telling me this? Richardson slowly bowed his head and looked at his toes. You gave me a chance to gain experience to mature. I believe I can help you. Very simple feelings of gratitude. If you hadn't said so, no one would know that you knew Dutanese. After all, you were born and raised in an East Balam colony manor. Klein carefully sized up Richardson, chuckled inwardly, and made some silent poignant comments. However, he didn't plan on letting this valet of his follow him to the southern continent. Firstly, it would make it inconvenient for him to carry out certain operations. Secondly, if he was recognized by some nation re-establishment society member of the numinous episcopate, it might end up affecting the rest of his life. Klein laughed and replied, I have plenty of friends there. They're all fluent in Dutanese and are aware of the traditions there. You have more important things to do. Stay in Backlund. Help me deliver some gifts to my friends at fixed periods of time. I'll be giving you a name list when the time comes. Also, read more papers and take note of investment opportunities and also perform on-the-ground checks. Finally, give me a corresponding report. I will get Ma'am Tanaja to specially prepare some funds for this. Richardson was somewhat surprised before saying in pleasant surprise, Yes, sir. I will work hard. At that instant, he felt that he was being put in an important position as his eyes blurred up. From the moment he was born, this was the first time he felt hope for his future. It was something to look forward to. After dismissing Richardson, Klein took a comfortable bath to soothe his tense nerves. Then, he wore his pajamas and returned to the bedroom. Taking a pen and paper, he drew a symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. The full-body mirror surface ripples with aqueous light as silver light formed Loanese text. Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal and humble servant, A. Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. Are you about to leave Backlund again? Klein nodded and said, Yes. Without waiting for A. Rhodes to mention that he could question it, he asked, Can I still contact you in the southern continent? Of course. As long as you take out that magical radio transceiver. On the surface of the mirror, silver words quickly formed. However, you cannot leave it out in the real world for too long or use it too frequently. There are plenty of beneficiaries of the Mother Tree of Desire. She can use it to detect you. Klein nodded gently and asked, What do you know about the Mother Tree of Desire? A. Rhodes suddenly fell into silence. It was only after a very long time that its silver luster formed a complete sentence. I don't dare to mention it, nor do I dare to show it. Chapter 889. Warning to everyone: don't dare to mention it or show it. At least for A. Rhodes, the Mother Tree of Desire is definitely stronger than Sequence 1 Zeratal. No, it's even stronger than the Monster Pathway's uniqueness, Die of Probability. There should be a way to circumvent the restriction to get A. Rhodes to display the corresponding information, such as bringing it above the gray fog. Heh, how is that possible? That won't happen unless I'm already an angel and in complete control of that mysterious space. Klein's eyes moved slightly without pressing the question. He asked, It's your turn to ask. The full-body mirror's silver light turned brisk, forming a new sentence. Great Master, what other instructions do you have for me? Nice question. Klein thought for a moment and said, After I leave Backlund, take note of Dr. Aaron Sirius's family. Once his wife gives birth, remember to mention it to me when I summon you. After careful consideration, Klein believed that leaving this matter to A. Rhodes was for the best. After all, no one could monitor Dr. Aaron's residence 24 hours a day. And what Klein needed to do was to switch residences at the end of the month to turn on the radio transceiver once. All right, Master. The words on the mirror reflected A. Rhodes's mood. I have a question. Speak. Klein nodded, giving permission. This time, the sentence A. Rhodes presented were filled with pauses as though it was very hesitant. Great Master, what relationship does that child have with you? It seemed to be puzzled why a supreme ruler above the spirit world would pay so much attention to a yet-to-be-born infant. I've already said that it's the yet-to-be-born child of Dr. Aaron Series. Yet A. Rhodes fails to notice anything special about Willa Septon. When it comes to hiding his fate and special traits, a snake of fate is far better than the angels of the other sequences. However, the magic mirror is able to accurately give me the time when Tail Devourer Ouroboros would leave Backlund. It's likely that Will Septon's reboot makes it difficult for high-leveled existences to notice anything. This might also be why he can avoid the Angel of Fate. Klein answered in enlightenment, friends. About being Will Septon's godfather, it was just a casual thought. He didn't have much confidence about that or dare to force it, afraid that he would annoy the Snake of Fate. Only friends. Rhodes revealed an inexplicable sense of disappointment in its words. Great Master, you can ask a question. Klein thought for a moment before saying, do you know who the person I met at the East Bala Military Veterans Mess is? If you aren't sure who I'm referring to, I can draw him for you. In the dark and deep mirror, aqueous light surfaced, producing a cold and bearded man with dark blue eyes. It was none other than the demigod Klein suspected to be of the Black Emperor pathway. He deliberated and asked, what else do you wish to say? If anyone else had asked such a question, Klein believed that Rhodes would smite them with lightning or use another malicious method to tease them. However, he believed that, as a supreme ruler above the spirit world, he had the right to ask such a question. It was also an opportunity to test Rhodes's bottom line. The silver light on the full-body mirror's surface transformed into another new line without any hesitation. Great Master, Amon is already in Backland as you expected. As it's his avatar that came, I can see it. What do you mean as I expected? When did I expect it? Klein pricked up his brows and said, I'm aware. All right. That's it for today. I'll summon you again using the radio transceiver if I come across any more questions. Yes, Master, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, is constantly awaiting your orders. Goodbye. The mirror's surface depicted an emoticon of waving a handkerchief. Klein watched in silence until everything was restored to normal. On the second day, which was a Monday, he had already made preparations to head to the southern continent. Apart from the luggage that contained 2 sets of clothes, 500 pounds, and some miscellaneous clothing that was meant for show, he threw the remaining 12,125 pounds and 87 gold coins above the grey fog. The reason why he was so careful was because Klein had a deep impression on his last death and resurrection. If he hadn't had an anonymous account with a few £100 from Miss Justice, he had no idea how long he had to wander the streets. Perhaps he had to really get a job at the circus to be a clown, or he'd have to head to a certain gangster leader's place to borrow some money. Seeing that it was almost 3, Klein headed up above the grey fog, prepared to have this week's tarot gathering. He had previously done a divination here, and he received the conclusion that, unless they were in the same building, Blasphemer Amon was unable to detect a tarot club member being pulled up into the mysterious space above the grey fog. Before long, dark red beams shot up in the Grand Palace, materializing into blurry figures. Having confirmed that she was restarting her psychology lessons this week and having re-established contact with the psychology alchemists, Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table in a relatively good mood. She stood up, raised the corners of her skirt, and bowed. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Opposite her, the hanged man also got up and bowed, but he had another question on his mind. He had originally promised the world Gehrman Sparrow that he would give him the mystical item made from the ocean songster Beyonder characteristic last week. But to his dismay, something happened to the artisan, preventing him from handing it over in time. Chapter 890. Ignore him regarding Miss Justice's question. Klein had already considered it some time ago. After all, leaving troublesome problems to the official organizations who could resolve them was his modus operandi. However, Leonard's and Palaz Zorost's reaction made him realize something different. Leonard was a red glove of the Nighthawks. He could easily create an informant to pass the news of Amon being in Backland to the Church of Evernight, and then let the Archbishop and high-ranking deacons decide on a strategy before carrying out an operation. It wouldn't expose his problem, and it could also quash any latent troubles. Yet, he had chosen to leave using the excuse of a mission. It was obvious to Klein that Amon's appearance was tied to the reason for Leonard's choice of action. He had the suspicion that informing the Church of Evernight might result in unpredictable negative outcomes. Therefore, the angel of the Marauder pathway in Leonard's body had denied this choice of action. And he was one of the existences who knew the various Beyonder powers that Amon possessed. When I have no idea what to do, the choice is undoubtedly to emulate those with experience. Although there's the grey fog separating us, and any problem will cease at Miss Justice's side, there's no need to take such risks. There aren't many members of the Tarot Club to begin with. Every one of them needs to be cherished. Thoughts flashed through the Fool Klein's mind as he shook his head and said with a calm, humored tone, "Ignore him. Ignore him." Mr. Fool's attitude is as if Amon is a stray dog. In his eyes, only sequence 0 true deities are worthy of attention? That's right. The last time the sun was possessed by Amon's avatar, Mr. Fool had easily cleansed it away. As long as Amon doesn't appear in person, it's not too big a problem for him. The reason Mr. Fool emphasized this matter at the beginning is to warn us to be careful. Alger thought in fearful respect and enlightenment. Audrey similarly interpreted the meaning that it was a trivial matter. She suddenly made the connection. Is Mr. World Gehrman Sparrow's temporary departure of Backlund to avoid Angel of Time Amon? To Mr. Fool, although he is still slowly recovering his standing, level and powers, it's not difficult for him to deal with Amon's avatar. The sun's encounter is evidence. He got his bless to avoid Amon to not attract the Angel of Time's real body, as this can spoil his plans of awakening? Yes. He emphasized it to us as a warning, worried that we wouldn't react properly when chancing upon Amon. Mr. Fool really shows his concern for us. At this moment, Emlyn had just digested the matter of King of Angels blasphemer Amon's appearance in Backlund. Although he was arrogant, repeated tarot gatherings had allowed him to understand what a King of Angels was. Or could it be the case that the Times is part of the original creator? Only when the Times develop according to a certain expectation can he draw energy from it and revive. This isn't scientific. Of course, whatever I see and participate in now isn't scientific at all. Actually, if I had any say, why revive the creator who rides above all? Everyone can just go through the motions and enjoy themselves without any restrictions. Isn't that better? Based on my observations, there are many members who share similar viewpoints as mine. However, there are a number of members who are stubborn and inflexible, strictly abiding to their beliefs. I wonder if they should be called idealists or crazy cultists. What I can't see through the most is that mysterious leader. Old Mr. Hermes told me that this organization began with him. It was organized with people who shared his beliefs and goals. However, he seldom expresses his thoughts, never stopping many of the members who use the organization for their own purposes. At times, I will even forget his existence. He seems to enjoy sitting there, silently watching everyone converse. But on one matter, I witnessed his might. A high-sequence beyonder who had gone against their so-called trend of the times was put forth by him. In 30 seconds, the person became a target of elimination. And I believe that the poor fellow wouldn't survive past summer. Who is he? Some ancient god that survived the second epoch? Roselle had used 2 question marks at the end of the sentence to express his strong doubts. This was something he seldom did. Hence, Klein suspected that this was the reason why Bernadette had chosen this diary entry. In it was a man carrying a cross. This was likely the divine image of the so-called creator. I sat in the front pew and idly chatted with the priest. He told me of many different stories. He said that when humans were first born, the ones that ruled the skies, land, and sea were all sorts of crazy bloodthirsty monsters. They were said to be the origins of the later species. Dragons, giants, and elves. These monsters freely indulged in their desires, occupying all kinds of places. It appeared that it wouldn't take long before they destroyed the entire world. At this moment, it was the creator who had awoken. He retrieved the special traits and powers that they had been blessed with, and he had bestowed it to the humans. After that, he returned to his slumber, leaving behind a prophecy. When madness, cruelty, greed, indulgence, coldness, and bloodthirstiness drowns the land once again, he would awaken and retrieve everything. As we spoke, the priest held the hanging cross by his chest and silently prayed. Such a myth is completely different from the church's canon. There are many interesting parts that are worth thinking about. October 15th. I've been back in Trier for a day. Only then did I forget to ask the priest for his name. Forget it. There will still be a chance in the future. My sixth sense as a man tells me that I'll definitely head to that chapel again. Isn't this the condensed version of the City of Silver's myth? The period around the end of the second epoch and the beginning of the third epoch. That priest seems to know a lot. Perhaps, an organization that passes down such a myth over the generations know a lot. Klein's mind stirred as the diary pages in his hand vanished. Then he looked up at Ma'am Hermit. "Go ahead." Katlia immediately bowed her head. "Honorable Mr. Fool, what I wish to know is if the place that Emperor Roselle's mind and spirit calls home on that island or the depths of the cosmos?" "That island? That primitive island that caused Grimm to die and had left the Emperor shocked? From the looks of it, the Emperor treated the island with great importance towards the end of his life. Even Queen Mystic Bernadette noticed it. What does deep in the cosmos mean? The astral world? Or some other planet? There are many things about the Emperor that transcends his era, so he's suspected by his daughter to be an alien? Although it's a little ridiculous, it adheres to logic. After all, research has proven that this is a planet. The sun is a star, and apart from that is the endless universe, a galaxy with countless stars. How should I answer? I can't just tell her about transmigration. But it's not like I can't say anything." Klein pondered for a while before shaking his head with a smile. "Neither of them." Chapter 892. Individual Comprehension, Neither of them. Katlia ruminated over Mr. Fool's reply, suddenly feeling at a loss as to the true meaning of the question. She originally imagined that the place that Emperor Roselle's mind and spirit called home had to involve something philosophical or mystical. For example, the island might refer to the divine kingdom of the deity of his faith. The depths of the cosmos referred to the astral world, indicating Emperor Roselle's belief in surpassing himself in his quest for a deity's throne. In the end, Mr. Fool answered that it was neither. This denied nearly every possibility, making it difficult for her to think of any other answer. Perhaps what Her Majesty wishes to ask is not something I understand. What Mr. Fool is saying is pointing at another explanation. It doesn't matter if I understand it. I'm only a communication tool between them. Katlia sighed inwardly as she sincerely bowed. Thank you for your answer. The other Tarot Club members were lost in regards to the question and answer. Although they could understand the reason for the question and could understand what the actual meaning of the mental and spiritual home was, they couldn't make any connection to the island or the depths of the cosmos. Hence, all of them had their own interpretations and guesses, but all of them felt that their theories were distant from the truth. Subconsciously, Furs believed that the island referred to the woman Roselle loved the most. The depths of the cosmos referred to the Emperor's late years when he cast his gaze to what he deemed the Sea of Stars. Audrey believed that the island referred to one's island of self-consciousness in psychology. The sea was the conscious, and below the sea's surface was the subconscious. And the cosmos referred to the spirituality sky that represented the astral world. Hence, the corresponding question became, did Emperor Roselle believe in himself, deities, or purely nature? From this angle, Mr. Fool's answer appeared rather strange. It was as though he was saying that Emperor Roselle didn't believe in anything, including himself. I might be misinterpreting it. But if that's really the case, Emperor Roselle might seem conflicted based on what Mr. Fool says, but in fact, it might conceal a deeper secret. Or it could be that, in his later years, he had seen through life. He began thinking about the universe, the world, deities, and the basic qualities of humanity. He became a pessimist and a nihilist? Audrey seemed to be training her abilities as she thought with piqued interest. Alger had similar thoughts as Katlia. As for Emlyn, he considered it for a moment before decisively giving up upon realizing that he had no clue. Derek had no interest in Emperor Roselle, but he didn't break the silence. He kept considering the conversations he was to have later. Finally, the fool, who was cloaked by the grey fog, chuckled and said, "You may begin." Alger immediately looked at the world and deliberated over his words. "Sorry, your mystical item will require a little more time." Without waiting for him to speak, he quickly gave an explanation. That artisan had strangely gotten infected by a sickness, and there are suspicious snoopers appearing in the vicinity. This resulted in a delay. I will personally make a trip to see if I can resolve his problems so that he can quickly recover. We'll try to make the mystical item you need within 2 weeks. He spoke extremely sincerely as a way to express his apologies and importance on the matter. But in his actual description, he had secretly pushed all the blame to the artisan. It was as though he was saying to the world that if he were displeased, I will teach him a lesson for you. If that's not enough, I will even give you his exact location for you to personally pay him a visit. That artisan sure is troublesome. Mr. Hanged Man treats this quite seriously. Non-official, or should I say artisans who are willing to accept orders from unknown origins, are extremely rare. If they can be secured, it's best that they are secured. Klein pondered for a moment and got the world to hoarsely reply, I will allow this delay, but there shouldn't be a next time. He spoke very calmly, but it alarmed Alger. He could almost feel the hidden murderous intent in the world Gehrman Sparrow. Thank you for your understanding, he said with a staid expression. Upon hearing their conversation, Katlia looked at the hanged man, curled her lips, and nudged her glasses. She said, if you are unable to resolve the problems, I can provide some help. From her point of view, as long as the problem wasn't serious, she could even do it for free. After all, this meant that she could skip the hanged man and directly establish connections with the artisan. Alger obviously sensed the true intent of this pirate admiral. He felt that she was beginning to severely encroach into his territory, giving him a certain level of pressure. He paused for a moment and replied in an unperturbed manner, Then, I will thank you on his behalf for your kindness. On the one hand, he expressed his close ties with the artisan, and on the other hand, didn't directly object to her help, thus giving him sufficient leeway. Compared to having Gehrman Sparrow find fault with him, sacrificing some benefits wasn't something unacceptable. Katlia didn't harp on the matter as she turned to look at the world. Are you pleased with the information on West Balam? She had already gathered all the information on West Balam that Gehrman Sparrow needed last Thursday. She had handed it to him via the strange messenger. She was filled with fear when it came to Mr. Fool, so given any other methods, she was unwilling to disturb that existence. It cost me a total of £300. If it wasn't good enough, I would have asked for a refund there and then. Klein mumbled and made the world answer tersely as an affirmation. Then, the fake person cast its gaze on Miss Magician. Furs immediately felt uncomfortable, akin to the feeling of a rat being targeted by a cat. She couldn't help but consider if she had done something wrong. Could it be that during my conversation with Zio, my description, defamation of Dwayne Dantes, was heard by him? Or is he displeased that I didn't refund him the money? Furs stopped thinking about the bodyguard mission that had happened days ago as she asked, quaking with consternation, Mr. World, is there something? The world nodded and said, a commission. Get information on Calderon City from the Abraham family. Most important of all is its location. Calderon City. Why is the world suddenly searching for this mysterious spirit world city? An instruction from Mr. Fool? It's a new part of his reawakening plans? Katlia had some idea about Calderon City, so she was quite perplexed. The other Tarot Club members, including Furs, didn't know what city the world was looking for. All they could do was maintain their silence. Among them, Emlyn felt that he had heard of it before, but he couldn't recall the exact details. About 4 seconds later, Furs forced a smile. No problem. I can help you ask. How much would it cost? The world asked in an unperturbed tone. £1,000. No, £500. No, I still need to deduct the bodyguard fee. Furs's mind raced and finally gave her price. £350. That's cheap. Other than the Spirit World 7 lights, perhaps only the Abraham family has detailed information on Calderon City. Yes, to Miss Magician, it's just about asking her teacher. It's indeed simple and convenient. It's no wonder it's not expensive. Klein was first surprised before coming to a realization. He made the world nod and say, Deal. After watching this transaction close, Audrey noticed something amusing. Miss Magician seems to be very afraid of Mr. World. It was to the point of being a reflex. She had previously met Dwayne Dantes, but didn't know that he was Gehrman Sparrow. During this period, she discovered something terrifying? I'll arrange to meet her and Zio at Glaint's place. Let's see if I can figure out something. Audrey thought as she indiscernibly nodded. At this moment, seeing that the world had nothing else, Emlyn hurriedly looked at the sun. Do you have the sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic of the artificial vampire? I haven't accrued enough merit points. Derek didn't feel ashamed this time. On the contrary, he felt that Mr. Moon was being overly anxious. How could the points needed for a sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic be so easily amassed? Emlyn turned his head disgruntledly when he suddenly recalled something. He hurriedly said to Miss Magician, I have clues to the cursed item and remnant spirituality from an ancient wraith. Chapter 893. Hair-resembling plants. The one that was most interested Quarren's suicide was none other than Justice Audrey. However, she had long noticed that Furs had some slight interest in the case. Hence, she didn't ask and had maintained her posture, patiently waiting for a particular best-selling author to pose the question. In just a second or two, Furs looked at the borders of the table in front of the world and asked after some deliberation, "What's the truth?" Klein had already rehearsed how he was to describe it, so without any hesitation, he got the world to say, "The mastermind behind it is the royal family's consultant Vin Rambus. He probably has another identity. A counselor of the psychology alchemists." When she heard the first sentence, Audrey's mind had already naturally produced the image of a genial elder. This man came from an aristocratic background. He had graduated from Birth University and possessed profound knowledge and outstanding insight. He had been a consultant to the royal family for more than a decade and was publicly recognized as a scholar, a good man, a gentleman. Audrey had previously suspected that Quarren's suicide might have been instigated by the royal family, but she never expected the mastermind to be the genial, amiable, kind, and humorous Vin Rambus. When the world announced the other identity of the man, she found herself unable to hide her alarm and puzzlement. Vin Rambus is a beyonder? He's a counselor of the psychology alchemists? This also means that he might be a demigod. I've seen him so many times, but I've never connected him to the mysterious world. I always found him to be solely a scholar, a knowledgeable scholar. If Mr. World wasn't misled in his investigations, I'd really find it unbelievable that Vin Rambus, who's known to be helpful to others, would treat a life with such coldness. He coldly made a child lose his father, a wife to lose her husband, parents to lose their son. He usually presents himself to be cultured and loving. Politics is dirtier than I imagined. Same for the royal family. Speaking of which, I have yet to meet a counselor of the psychology alchemists. I've never made contact with their upper echelons. I never expected that this secret organization is almost no different from the cults like the Aurora Order and Numinous Episcopate. Our tarot club is better. Mr. Fool is always stopping or disrupting the plans of the evil gods and devils. While Audrey's mind was in chaos, Alger acutely sensed the brewing problems in Baklan's political climate. He felt that various factions were interlinked and that there were many secrets. They formed a massive bucket of explosives that could explode at any time. The nobles, royal family, Church of Storms, Church of Evernight, Church of Steam, the burgeoning rich, the commoners who live on a precipice, and the lowest class who live abject lives. The revolution of the times is so obvious. To think I didn't recognize this at all. I just simply believed Kalangos's words and the evidence he showed. An epoch where the old gods fade and new gods arise is about to descend. The tides of history are roaring in an unstoppable manner. Alger silently sighed, seemingly seeing the tall Gothic bell tower and the bell of order that hung in it. And surrounding this famous landmark, swirls of air was materializing and the light was darkening. It appeared that eddies were gearing up to form hurricanes. Suddenly, Alger had a theory. What arises might not be a new god, but an ancient god from an even more remote age. He instinctively glanced at the seat of honor at the end of the long bronze table before quickly retracting his gaze. He could hardly quell the upheavals in his heart. At that moment, he had a baffling feeling that his ambition and goals were too puny. He had only wanted to become an archbishop of the Church of Storms, a saint. In this position, he would have authority in the world and he could direct many things in secret. Since the old gods are fading away and new gods are rising, Mr. Fool will be returning to his throne in the astral world. Then why shouldn't I consider being an angel? Only at this level can I complete a qualitative change in my existence. I'll be able to live a long lifespan. Only then can I lord over people and lead a large-scale organization. I'll wield authority over the world. As thoughts flashed through his mind, Alger trembled in an almost indiscernible manner. His heart was spewing with agitated emotions. When Katlia connected Queen Mystic's whereabouts for the past 2 months, she felt that the latter had been spending a large portion of her time in Bakland. Is something about to happen in Bakland? I can try asking when I write this time. I wonder what response Her Majesty will give. Katlia nudged her heavy glasses on her nose and swept her gaze across Miss Justice and the other members from Bakland. Furs knew some of the details of Quarren's suicide case. She knew that the victim had acted on his own the entire time and that he wasn't controlled. She also knew that the witnesses believed without a doubt that everything was a result of Dwayne Dante's. Comparing this with the actual situation had induced a deep sense of fear towards the counselor of the psychology alchemists. She didn't wish that she would one day find out that her thoughts and hobbies were all a result of someone else's doing. How is this different from being a puppet? A high-sequence beyonder of the spectator pathway is terrifying. However, this is really good writing material. Currently, the science of psychology already has hypnosis. In my next book, I want to write about a sick girl liking a gentleman. She uses hypnosis to make him fall in love with her. The ending climax is when she discovers that the gentleman is actually a master hypnotist. Furs gaped her mouth before closing it again. She didn't ask further about Vin Rambus since she didn't know him at all. Klein's sharing of Vin Rambus was mainly to warn Miss Justice. He wanted her to be careful and wary of the psychology alchemist's counselor. Now, seeing that his goal had been achieved, he said, "There's another matter. Help me take note of Brigadier General Konas Kilgore. He's the deputy director of MI9. On the surface, he's only a sequence 5, but in actual fact, he's a Black Emperor pathway demigod. He possesses rather potent spiritual perception and can sharply detect that others are observing him." Konas Kilgore. Audrey repeated this name inwardly and realized that she had no impression of this gentleman. Either we have little overlap in our social circles, to the point of just nodding at each other when bumping into one another without asking who the other is, or he keeps an extremely low profile. He doesn't attend such gatherings often. If I have a chance, I should ask Kantz. He's from MI9. He definitely knows this superior of his. Audrey was no longer surprised that Konas was a demigod despite being a sequence 5 in name. From her point of view, it was common for members of an intelligence agency to be in such situations. Alger and Katlia had more or less heard of the high-ranking member of MI9, Konas Kilgore. However, they lacked a deeper understanding of the matter, so all they could do was refresh whatever they knew and remind themselves to be especially careful when encountering anything to do with the person in question. Seeing that Mr. World had nothing else to share, Derek didn't wait for Mr. Hanged Man to ask. He said, "I've made a new friend again." He paused for a moment before getting to the crux of the matter. The area he patrols includes the former chief's mausoleum. He told me that the 6-member council has yet to open the door that leads underground. However, through the cracks on the outer rocks of the mausoleum, there are luxuriant and strange plants growing out from them. They look like human hair. The 6-member council has 3 demigods. Even if there are some out on expeditions and aren't in the City of Silver, the other 3 likely control a certain powerful sealed artifact or have grazed an evil spirit, giving them nearly demigod strength. Despite joining forces for so many days, they haven't managed to open the entrance to the former chief's mausoleum. This means that it's quite a serious problem. Also, what's the reason for plants that resemble human hair to suddenly grow? One question after another arose in Klein's mind as he waited for the Hanged Man to ask Little Sunday. He knew that the former would definitely have questions. Alger, who finished listening quietly, frowned slightly before relaxing his brows. After some deliberation he said, "Apart from that, are there any anomalies? Is the one in charge of opening the mausoleum that shepherd Elder Lovia?" "It's not her. The chief is present too. Likewise for 2 other elders," Derek answered seriously. "There aren't any other anomalies for the time being." Alger nodded and said, "Very good. Maintain your present state. Establish communications with more people. Keep a note of any changes with that mausoleum." After being praised, Derek hurriedly nodded as he answered eagerly. After a few more exchanges of words, the gathering naturally began the learning segment. Furs had planned on asking what the pharaoh mummy was for, but after seeing the world, she shut her mouth. When the gathering ended, Klein, who had returned to the real world, turned on the tap and washed his face and hands before patiently waiting for night to come. When the time came, he would be riding on a military airship to Desi Bay. Southern continent. Baron's Harbor. As the Golden Dream was cruising south in the Fog Sea, Danitz only took a few days to arrive at the harbor northmost of West Balam. He draped himself with a dark-colored cloak and carried a suitcase. Wearing the sun brooch inside his clothes, he carried an iron-black boxing glove close to his chest. He was walking down the harbor's roads and was out while sweating profusely. He felt that he was already armed to the teeth, far stronger than he was before. Once out the harbor, Danitz glanced to his sides and extended his hand to stop a carriage. When the carriage driver saw him, he set out a string of words. What is he saying? Danitz looked blankly at him. It took him a few seconds to recall one thing. He didn't know the local language, Dutanese, at all. And back when he came to West Balam, he had his captain, a polyglot, leading the crew. He didn't need to worry that he didn't understand anything. Danitz blurted out in surprise. Anderson threw up his hands. I didn't say that. What has my repeated visits to West Balam in search of treasure have to do with knowing Dutanese? Without knowing Dutanese, how are you able to understand those texts in the ancient temples and castle ruins? How do you seek out treasure? Danitz's expression contorted bit by bit as his tone sped up without him realizing it. Anderson picked up the cup served by the waiter and gulped it down. Problems that can be solved with a dictionary aren't problems. Besides, does not knowing Dutanese mean that you can't communicate with the people from the southern continent? With that said, he turned to look at the waiter. Speaking in the Intis language, he said, 2 specialty pork knuckles. The waiter obviously gave him a blank look as he kept pointing at the menu. Anderson didn't fluster at all as he unhurriedly pressed his right hand to his nose and mimicked the grunting of a pig. The waiter was first taken aback before revealing a look of enlightenment. Then, Anderson pointed at his knuckles and pointed at the Baron's label on the menu before using his fingers to show $2 $. As the waiter spoke in an accented Dutanese, he repeatedly nodded to show his comprehension. By the side, Danitz was dumbfounded by what he saw. After a series of gestures, mixed with a few basic Dutanese words, he finally finished ordering the meal. Turning his head to Danitz, he smiled. Get it? In this world, there's a common language. Body language. Danitz watched with a frozen expression as he curled the corners of his lips as a response. A carriage drove out of West Borough, and it headed south at an intersection. Soon, it arrived at a military base. With Colonel Calvin's letter and a junior officer escorting him, Klein successfully entered the base and arrived at a square paved with rammed earth. Berthed on it was a dark blue and white behemoth. This airship was dozens of meters long, and its truss had solid and light composite metal frames extended from it. They were intercrossed with one another as they held up an impermeable cloth used as cushions. Beneath it were openings mounted with machine guns, projectile launchers, and cannons. At this moment, the ignition steam engine had yet to hum, and the corresponding propellers were still static. Everything appeared extremely silent. Klein handed his documents and proof of identity to the officer on guard by the gangway. After receiving permission, he walked up onto the airship with his suitcase in hand. It was like a ship with 3 sections. The uppermost section had complicated machinery and a cargo hall. The middle section had a hall for buffets and balls. Surrounding the hall were hallways that led to the upper and lower sections. These hallways included lounges. As for the lowest section, they were the rooms for the machine guns, projectile launchers, and cannons, as well as the soldiers' cabins. Chapter 895. Finally at ease. Leonard's expression froze for a moment before he composed himself. He had already remembered that Dwayne Dantes was working with the military, and was preparing to sell a batch of firearms and cannons to West Balam. Therefore, even though it was surprising to see this gentleman appear on a military airship, it wasn't jarring in any way. The only issue is why he's heading to West Balam so quickly? Amon's arrival has also exerted some pressure on him? Leonard's mind raced as he leveled his gaze and walked up the gangway with his teammates to the midsection and entered a huge lounge reserved for them. Not long after the red gloves took their seats, a deep hum sounded. The rotating of the propeller and all kinds of frictional sounds were heard. It caused the floorboards and walls to gently shake. As the tremors increased in intensity, it turned into a wobbling motion as the airship rose up and slowly regained its stability. Klein had already sat down and buckled his seatbelt. He was looking at his surroundings out of curiosity as he experienced a different form of flight. The takeoff isn't too stable. The altitude is also rather low, but without encountering any hurricanes, the tremors are still all right. I wonder how it was done. Klein looked diagonally at the windows ahead without any intention of unbuckling his seatbelt or walking around. This wasn't acrophobia, even if he had a mild fear of heights. This was because he was briefly wearing creeping hunger and had the ability of short-distance flight and teleport. He was only seriously acting like a desi tycoon who was riding on an airship for the first time. At this moment, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered. He hurriedly clicked his teeth and activated spirit vision. He saw the colors around him saturate as they clearly stacked upon one another. He saw bones spew out from the floor, gushing out like a fountain in midair, forming a giant skeleton that was nearly 4 meters tall. This skeleton's eye sockets were burning with dark flames. Its arms were hanging down, holding a folded letter. Mr. Azek's messenger. He has finally recovered from his state of metamorphosis? Klein was pleasantly surprised as he tried to stand up to receive the letter. But when he felt a force pulling him back at his abdomen, he recalled that had his seatbelt buckled. When he reached out to unbuckle it, the skeleton messenger crouched down and stuffed the letter into his hands. Klein was taken aback as he looked up into the eye sockets which were burning with pitch-black flames. He nodded gently as form of gratitude. He could understand why the messenger didn't appear from the section below, allowing half his body to tear through the floorboard, as this was a military airship. Apart from the red gloves, there were probably other Beyonders. They also had spiritual perceptions and different levels of spirit vision. They could also barely sense the messenger's existence. But I don't think that delivering a letter in such a crouched manner is being polite. I'd rather it did what it used to. Klein mumbled and saw the skeleton messenger crumble into illusory bones, gushing down like a waterfall. In the huge lounge, Daily Simone, who still enjoyed being called a spirit medium, suddenly turned her head and looked at the room across the hall. Her brows furrowed slightly as her eyes narrowed. Daly immediately retracted her gaze and said to the low-ranking officer in the corner of the lounge who was acting as a waiter, "Make me a cocktail. Black Rand and champagne. Half each." "That's a very strange mixture, ma'am." As the officer unbuckled his seatbelt, he walked to the bar that was welded to the ground as he attempted to offer a suggestion. Daly, with her blue eyeshadow and blush, said with a smile, "I enjoy unique tastes." Upon saying that, she casually asked, "Is there anyone else on this airship besides the military officers and us?" The officer answered while opening the bar's cabinet, "Yes. A merchant. Apparently, his name is Dwayne Dantes. He is working with the Ministry of Defense." Dwayne Dantes. Daly was taken aback as she turned her eyes slightly away and asked, "What kind of work?" To her right, Leonard Mitchell had subconsciously changed his seating posture. He switched from crossing his right leg over his left to his left over his right. "I'm not sure," the officer answered with a shake of the head. "Apparently it has something to do with using the gentleman's experience in the southern continent." "Southern continent?" Daly repeated the word in thought and stopped asking. In the small lounge opposite, Klein had already unfolded the letter to read it seriously. It was indeed from Azek Eggers. He indicated that his previous experiences had allowed him to retrieve more of his memories. He had no choice but to sleep to digest and recover. Thus the late reply. Klein truly relaxed as he cast his gaze towards the end in a good mood. In regards to the spirit world plunderers, Azek's description was, "It's a rather scheming and rare creature. They are very good at disguises, making it very difficult to find them. One thing to make use of is their strong aggressiveness. However, they're also very dangerous. Even with a strength that is close to sequence 4, one needs to be sufficiently careful. Otherwise, one can accidentally end up as its sole avatar. Its exact characteristic is, I'm not sure nor am I able to recall where spirit world plunderers are most active. I suggest you pray to Ire Moria. He is very friendly to humans and will be willing to answer similar questions while wielding authority in such matters. The ritual's key is the correct honorific name and symbol. Once you have the clues to a spirit world plunderer, you can wait a while. I might be able to provide you some help. How can I bother you?" Klein raised his right hand and pinched the two ends of his mouth. He then flipped the page and read the final page. "Likewise, I will help you seal that glove once again. It's not that I do not wish to teach you the way to seal it, but it's unlikely that you can do it. This requires the power of the underworld, requiring at the very least, an undying to do it." "All right. I should quickly have some free time. I recall you mentioning about Death's Ring. Mr. Azek's changes don't seem too significant. At least I can't tell from the letter." Klein slowly exhaled as he flicked his wrist and ignited the paper in his hand, turning it to ashes before it floated into the trash can that was welded to the floor. Although he didn't receive the whereabouts of spirit world plunderers from Azek, He could also determine that this descendant of death similarly didn't remember Calderon City. He also guessed that this mysterious spirit world city likely had nothing to do with the underworld. Otherwise, Mr. Azek, who had already restored connections with the underworld, should have recalled something about it. Even so, Klein still planned on replying to ask more about Calderon City. Regardless, one should always have hope. Also, I should inform Mr. Azek that I'm in the southern continent. Klein seriously considered the contents of his reply. However, he didn't immediately write it, afraid that the act of summoning the messenger would be noticed via the spiritual perception of the other Beyonders on board the airship. As he turned his gaze, Klein looked out the window once again. It was dark and silent. Looking at the dark sky with the concealed crimson moon, Admiral of Stars Katlia retracted her gaze, picked up her pen, and deliberated over her words. The answer is neither. She was originally somewhat perplexed as to why Queen Mystic hadn't directly asked what home was. Instead, she had attached two guesses. This made it easy for the question to receive an ineffective answer. But on second thought, she believed that Queen Mystic had thought it through in a way far better than she could have. This was because this question was posed to a secret existence that was suspected to be an ancient god. As the number of diary pages she could provide had numbered about 20, with each attempt giving her an answer. Therefore, just 3 pages, even if they were of high value, made it difficult to be equivalent in value to a key question of where Emperor Roselle's mental and spiritual home was. The secrets concealed within might even be more important than a single card of blasphemy. And Her Majesty's question seems stubborn. She doesn't seem willing to switch to something else. Therefore, she specially added 2 choices, hoping that she could obtain an answer via elimination or directly obtain confirmation. In contrast, this lowers the value of the question.